if there's one thing that is super difficult for us to understand in mental health, it's the idea of doing nothing or not doing. This, as in many other areas of life, goes completely against the grain for us. The idea of doing nothing in the face of mental distress, mental suffering, mental torment seems so wrong to us. It seems incredibly wrong to us. And it is fantastically hard to put the other side of the argument across. The other side of the argument being that not doing is the only helpful thing. I was going to say the only helpful thing to do, but of course we don't do it. And that's why it's helpful, because we're not doing it. If we did it, it wouldn't be helpful. If we did it, it would rebound on us and multiply our pain. Which is why doing isn't such a great idea. Because doing means, doing for a start, it comes out of our thinking minds, it comes out of thought. And that means it's aggression. And if it's aggression, that means it's going to ricochet on us. In other words, the pain that we're trying to avoid or offset comes back at us amplified 100-fold, 1,000-fold. There's no limit to how many-fold it could be amplified. Now, in the way that I've just said that there, which is a very simple idea, both to explain and understand, but somehow it gets lost within the wider culture. That message doesn't get very far. It doesn't make any sense to us. And on the contrary, what makes sense to us is doing. Okay, maybe common or garden, everyday kind of doing can be seen as not good enough. So we come up with fancy doing, clever doing, sophisticated doing, psychological doing, all sorts of doings, evidence-based doing, therapeutic doing, self-affirming doing, whatever the hell you want to call it. But doing is doing. All doing is just doing. I'm talking about purposeful doing here. All doing is only ever doing, and all doing, no matter what type or variety or flavour, whatever type of doing it is all aggression. And that's the end of it. That's all we need to know about it is aggression. So instead of talking about doing, we can just talk about aggression. And so then we see things in a different way entirely, because then I might say, well, what's the helpful, useful, efficacious type of aggression to use when I am suffering from whatever mental health disorder or condition or affliction or whatever? What's the right sort of aggression to use against this? And if I were to put it like that, then I wouldn't even need to wait for an answer, because obviously aggression isn't the thing. Fighting isn't the thing. Combating isn't the thing. Winning out isn't the thing. Beating the depression. Beating the anxiety. It all sounds very great, but it's bullshit. But of course it's bullshit. If my attempt to win, or my attempt to come out on top, or my attempt to beat the adversary or eliminate it, if my attempt is aggression, then that aggression gets multiplied 100-fold and comes right back at me at some point in the future, maybe soon, maybe not quite so soon, then obviously that puts a very different perspective on things. So all this militaristic type stuff doesn't sound so good. But of course we don't put it like that. We see doing in a different way. We see our doing as being righteous doing. We're correcting things that are wrong, so it's righteous. That's our assumption, therefore, that it's wrong. That's one part of the assumption. Another part of the assumption that I know what's right, I know how it should be. And then following on from that is the doing, which is the skillful way I have of making the thing that is wrong be the way I know it ought to be. And there's so many damn assumptions in that. It's rotten to the core with assumptions. So if we had any rigor in examining the basis for our pontifications, for our theories, for our ideas about therapy, if we had any rigor about it, we realise, damn, the ship I'm sailing in holds below the waterline in at least a dozen different places. It's so full of unexamined assumptions. It is pure rotten. Unexamined assumptions are not good things. They're examples of dumbness. Oh, well, I just assume that this is true without looking at it, without being curious about it, without going into it, and then carry on putting a hell of a lot of effort and time and all the rest of it in, acting as if it was true. Now, a good word for that is just being dumb. Pure dumb, super dumb. Dumb as anything. So what's the hell's wrong with us? We're not really that dumb. Why are we acting so dumb? To a man, to a woman, we are united in our dumbness when it comes to therapies. So what we could say, taking a bit of a step back and looking at what doing type therapies involve, we could say, to be very clear about it, because it's good to be clear about it, that they're all based on this premise. A premise which may or may not hold good, but it's a premise, so that's fair enough. So we just need to say what our premise is, and the premise is the premise of causality. In other words, if I do X, Y happens. That's the premise of causality. And this premise holds good for a lot of things. In everyday life, it holds good for an enormous amount of things. If I tip a bucket of water over my head, I get wet. I do X, Y happens. If I get a bunch of aluminium oxide and I melt it and pass an electric current through it, I'll get metallic aluminium at one end and oxygen released at the other. That's a technical procedure, and it always works. I do X, Y happens. But there is a problem with this, though, because causality, cause and effect, is so reliable in all of these areas. I don't even think about it. I don't think, or maybe there'll be a time when cause and effect don't work. And I don't need to think about whether it'll work or not when it comes to things like getting aluminium out of aluminium oxide. I don't need, because it always works every time. But when it comes to the world, which is not that of matter or physical substances, but which comes under the remit of the psychological realm, then this premise of I do X, Y happens very quickly shows itself. Well, it doesn't show itself if we're not looking, but if we do take the trouble to look, it very quickly shows itself up to be not sound, not reliable at all. So within the psychological realm, there is no cause and effect. There absolutely isn't. And if we really did take a bit of time to look into this, we would discover that from our own personal experience. This is probably, maybe, definitely the most important psychological law or psychological thing that we could learn. That cause and effect doesn't work. That we can't figure out what the thing Y is that I do so I can get the thing X to happen, or the other way around, or whatever way around. If we could learn this, then we'd be wise. But we absolutely haven't a clue. And it all sounds kind of abstract, I suppose, when talking about causality and I do X and then Y happens. But we can think about it. It really is the most simple thing that every single human being you'd ever meet, of whatever era in history, we all understand that in practical terms, i.e., we want to be happy, feel good. So we do the things that we imagine will make us happy or make us feel good. Who doesn't do that? Doesn't matter whether you're smart or not so smart, whether you're educated or not at all educated, we all do that. We work it out at an early age. So we work it out, but it doesn't work. And that is something that anyone who's ever bothered to look into it has discovered, and it's been said many times. There is no recipe for being happy. There is no X that we can do in order to be happy. And this is a grand experiment. As I've just been saying, human beings have been trying this for thousands upon thousands of years all across the planet, each one of us doing our best. And none of us have ever, this never worked for any of us, ever, for thousands and thousands of years. So if you want to talk about evidence-based, or if you want to talk about research, this is fantastic research. Now, admittedly, we don't know we're researching. It's just like a reflex that we've got a type of rudimentary cunning, and we use this cunning trying to find out what makes us happy without really knowing what we're doing, or without ever thinking about it in a philosophical way, obviously. And to this day, you'll find people trying to tell you ways to be happy, or saying that if you do this method, it'll make you happy, or here's what to do to have a happy and fulfilling life. Now, that is all total bullshit. Absolute bullshit. It couldn't be more preposterously wrong. For the simple reason that if I do stuff in order to be happy, that means I'm not happy. Therefore, what I'm doing is coming out of my unhappiness, and I'm trying to avoid the pain of that unhappiness in order to become happy. So there's pain avoidance, which we know is the root, as Jung and many others have said, of neurosis. Now, neurosis isn't happiness. That's not where the gates of happiness open to us. Neurosis is torment, unendurable, unbearable torment. And the reason it's torment is because our very attempts to escape it or rectify the situation that we're in make it worse. They amplify it. As I started off by saying, our cleverness to try and avoid the unsatisfactory or disagreeable situation that I'm in, and trying to find a gimmick or a method in order to be feeling in a way which is more pleasant to me, more satisfactory. That is neurosis. I'm rejecting one part of life and trying to get another part, thinking that I can do this, thinking that it's a kind of I can get an angle on life, that it's a game I can play and get the happy bit and not the other bit. If I were to cop on, which doesn't happen as easily as all that, what I'd discover is the way to become happy is that there is no way. Forget about it. As all the mystics say, forget about that crap. Just go through your life, and whatever comes along, go through that without trying to avoid it or without trying to hang on to it, without trying to be clever about it. So ultimately, when we're able to live every part of our life without rejecting it, without trying to be clever about it, manipulate it, in other words, living without an agenda, then this will result in inner peace, which is kind of what we mean when we say happy. We don't really mean elated or getting off on something or getting a buzz, because we all know that's pretty crappy, because it's all exciting 1 minute and then we're down again the next minute, and that's just what we always do. We're chasing buzzes. Happiness isn't a buzz to chase, it's beyond all buzzes. And even happiness is kind of a wrong word, because it implies we're floating around in some kind of bliss, which isn't it. It's more like living in a way which is actually real, and our lives are real, and we're able to live it with integrity and not be dissociated from it. And if we can do that, then the actual quality of wholeness that is in life is felt by us, and so we're kind of engaging in a process, and we're part of that process. And so there is something bigger than us operating. There's a principle bigger than us that is operating. So this is the via veritas, or the via veritas of the alchemist, the way of truth. Whatever's true, just see it to be true. Don't try and get clever about it and make up your own truths, or reject truths if you don't like them. But this isn't a recipe for happiness or peace of mind, because if we did it in order to obtain happiness or peace of mind, then it would become another gimmick. And whatever it is that we know is out there, which is kind of like a more profound and meaningful way of living life, instead of always being an escape artist or an avoidance artist, or someone who is fantasizing their own version of life which isn't really satisfying them, which is basically all of us. So if we think we can figure out any way at all to manipulate this principle of spontaneity, or this principle of the via veritas, we just get caught in a more complicated loop, because we're engaging in sophisticated aggression. We're still rejecting something there, of course. We're rejecting the way that we are, and we're trying to be a more spiritual way, a more enlightened way. And even though we might think that it's great to be seeking a more spiritual way of life, a more enlightened way of life, less deluded, materialistic way of life, it isn't, because that's just aggression. That's spiritual aggression. It's more sophisticated, but that doesn't mean it isn't going to rebound on us. It's just going to rebound on us in refined ways. That's actually going to spell more suffering for us, because the more clever we try to be, the more we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot. And this whole business about trying to be more spiritual or more enlightened, or in psychological terms, to heal ourselves, or to be more in tune with things, or to have more of a sense of authenticity about things. Anything we try and do like that is on purpose, that's aggression, which is of course why all our psychological therapies are aggression, at least all of the ones which we seem to make so much fuss about these days. It's not to say that there are no schools of psychotherapy which have not seen this fault, this error, and that do not rely on being aggressive. Most do, but there is also a tradition of genuine, whatever you'd call it, inquiry, reconciliation, whatever the hell you'd call it. There is a tradition of something genuine there. It's just not at all popular with us these days. Because for whatever reason, we're not as wise as we were. In fact, we've all become very dumb, intellectually dumb, because we're totally trading on our ability to manipulate the rational intellect, that's what the rational intellect is. We put all our money on manipulating, and we got very, very sophisticated in manipulating, which means that we got very refined in our aggression, which means that we're going to get a very refined and a higher level of suffering coming back at us, a more tortuous level. It's like the icing on the icing on the icing on the cake, and that isn't nice shit. It's a particular type of trap, and like everyone says, like Drunken Trungpa says, the spiritual trap is a worse trap than just your common average person who's just acting like a gobshite and not being very enlightened. He's in a trap, or she's in a trap, but it's not anywhere near as pernicious as the trap of a person who is trying to be spiritual, or which also corresponds to a person who is trying to psychologically therapize themselves so that they can live life in a less crappy or unsatisfactory way, or become more psychologically healed, or whatever it is. So that's one way of talking about why causality doesn't work. We can't do anything to be happier, because our attempting to be happy is the epitome of neurosis, the epitome of suffering. We can't do anything to get away from our pain, from our misery, from our stuckness, for exactly the same reason. It's exactly the same thing. Both are regression. And this is the thing we absolutely can't understand. Because then, if we could understand it even partially, we would see that, okay, if aggression is no good, what's left? And if aggression is purposeful doing, that means, okay, no more purposeful doing, which means not doing. But then we say, well, you can't just not do. You have to do something, because there's a bad thing happening. You have to do something about it. But what brought that bad thing, in inverted commas, about? So aggression in the first place. So trying to do something about it is not going to make it any better. And what's more, as I was saying a few minutes ago, if we try and get clever about this and then try to do not doing, or do nothing on purpose because we've gained a kind of an insight and we know this is the right thing to do, that's not going to work either, because it's just a more sophisticated form of aggression. Okay, thanks for watching.